Greetings! Anton here with a type of H3VR devlog that we haven't done in quite a while. And that's because this past week I went back up to Vegas for a much needed like 2-day break from reality. We'll call it that. And so I went back to one of my favorite places in the world, which is Battlefield Vegas, the venue which I have fired. Well, come to think of it, all of the fully automatic weapons that I've ever fired. I've been going about once a year or so since starting to work on the game. I have shot my way through, at this point, most of their collection, or at least most of the unusual side of their collection. And so I've got a couple clips for you folks this week, and I thought I would show them to you and sort of like just talk about what I was looking for and what I was trying to perceive, and sort of question marks and gaps I was trying to fill in. So let's dive right in. The first thing that I wanted to fire, because I had only ever fired semi-auto versions of them, was to fire a couple MP5s. So I fired the MP5K. And the MP5 SD. Oh, it's so gassy.
Yeah, it really is. That specialist pushes it all back.
Jeez. In part, I wanted to fire two of them just because I wanted to see how much that the sort of MP5 SD suppressor bleeds off a bunch of gas to make what is not a subsonic round into a subsonic round. So I wanted to see how much that actually affected overall perception of sort of recoil force and muzzle flip. It was noticeably lighter on the SD than the MP5K. And obviously there's a lot more weight in the front there, but it clearly was to a degree that was beyond just sort of weight differences. I guess I had never really noticed this before, but man, especially with the SD, I noticed these are the gassiest guns I think I have ever fired. I've fired a few things suppressed before, but nothing. The MP5 SD feels sort of like sticking your head in like a fireplace. Well, and in this case, I just wasn't prepared for it, so a bunch of it just went right up my nose. It was everything that I could do to not just start have a sneezing fit right there. It almost felt humorous. At first I was kind of wondering if I was being pranked. It was just that gassy. But obviously, they're still wonderful guns to fire. The roller delayed blowback is just about as smooth as you can get out of a sub gun. And I, of course, still just unreasonably adore this series. Next up, I fired an HK33.
Not too bad. You just had to miss 2 shots. You know, humble yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Because speaking of roller delayed blowback, I was actually curious how much this actually impacted, once again, the feeling and perception of recoil and muzzle flip and such in a larger caliber. As I think, I think I fired a G3 once, but it's been long enough that I can't remember what it was like. But yeah, I was just sort of wondering where the HK33 ended up fitting in terms of the perception of those forces and how smooth it felt compared to, on an axis you basically have on one side, you have, an AR-15, it's super light because of just the length of that spring and how far back the bolt goes. And then on the other, you've got, fairly stiff and sharp ones like a SIG 5.56 Patrol because the type of action that is fairly sharp. And I would say that the HK33 fits about halfway in between those. It's still not as smooth as an AR-15 parent gun, at least this one, which asterisks, as any time that I'm talking about my experience going there and firing these, every single one of these guns, they are shooting the crap out of them. Their armors are basically just like keeping those running. They're running thousands and thousands of rounds through these. I don't really know exactly even what range ammo they're using for it. So I would imagine that super clean, really well maintained sub couple thousand round versions of a number of these guns probably behave a little differently. So I always have to attach that little asterisk next to it. But it was still fun, and as I said, I love the form factor. I love the fire selector on old HK guns. Love them. A couple of guns that I fired were, I'll admit, even though obviously I can't own the fully automatic versions of them, I wanted to fire them in part because they're on the, like, maybe Anton shopping list side of things. So I had never actually fired a 9mm AR-15 pattern guns. So they had one here. I think they called it a Colt Commando, but I don't think that's the correct term for that. Or at least one of the people there. That might have just been their nickname for it. But super smooth, super fun, for obvious reasons. So yeah. Next on the list, which I have been trying to fire this gun now for the last 3 times I went. BF Vegas has an STG-44, but it has been down for repairs every single time I have gone. And it wasn't this time, so I was finally able to fire it. Such a beautiful piece. It's, if you don't know the background on the Sturmgewehr, you should read up. It was ahead of its time in many ways, both from a battlefield doctrine standpoint and a manufacturing standpoint. But it feels wonderful. It is heavier than I expected it to be, which, I mean, I think it was just from like reading about it and reading about early use of stamped metal. When you fired later guns, you have this mental image of what a, quote, stamped metal gun is in terms of its overall weight. And obviously this was significantly thicker stamped metal. And so it is bulky. It is very heavy. I got a couple malfunctions at the beginning, but it was because I wasn't shouldering it quite tightly enough. But after that, it was super fun, and it just I don't know, it has a dimension set that is very unique to it, and that makes it interesting to hold and fire just based on that. So, a very clacky one as well. Next up was something that, I guess this is a bit of a spoiler, because you're like, oh, is this coming to H3? You bet it is. I have someone working on it as we speak, which is the Ultimax. LMG. I've read about it, I've watched videos on it, and about the sort of like constant recoil system. It's the gun is used, I believe, by Singapore, and the lead designer on it is also, I think, the fellow who designed the Mini 14. And it's super fascinating how, I don't know the full details of exactly how its bolt functions, but basically after you get the recoil impulse from the first shot, and it comes back, and then after that, the gun just sort of almost like slightly shakes or wobbles, but doesn't really kick forward or back, or really have much of any perceptible muzzle flip. It is basically as close to a laser beam as anything that I've fired has been. There's almost like a perceptual disconnect, because obviously the scale and impact of each round firing is as loud as a rifle round, but the way the gun is feeling in your hand and moving is as though you're firing this very low caliber round. It's a little confusing. but it absolutely lives up to the reputation of the, like, once you start firing this, you could just kind of hold it wherever you want. I couldn't do what some of the people in the videos do, which is fire it one-handed, but I definitely let off the pressure on the foregrip just a little bit with my front hand to see if the gun would start to pull up, and it didn't at all. Like, you could just do this all day with it. It was fantastic.
Fantastic.
And one other thing about the Ultimax, which thankfully was warned about by the RSO, it's one of the reasons why the camera angle for the shot is not the best, is that thing fires brass out sideways like a second laser gun. It comes out with such force, and it's such a precise and consistent angle. It's borderline hilarious. A detail I would have never expected, but was glad to find out in the process of firing it, so I can implement that correctly on the gun in H3. Sadly, I don't have a clip at all of one of the things I fired. I finally got around to firing a Scar H. I had fired a Scar 16 a while back. I still love it, even though there are many people who argue that, like, really, is there a point to this one? But the Scar H, on the other hand, is just easily, it is the lightest firing, feeling from a recoil standpoint, 308 I've ever fired. Which my programmer soft and pillow-like shoulder appreciated deeply. And obviously, obviously the gun's already in the game, but I wanted to fire it in part because at some point Anton might want to own one. So I wanted to see if it lived up to the hype in separating itself from other 308s, and it did, which that's gonna hurt the wallet at some point. Machine gun wise, I had originally wanted to fire what is it, the MG like 1518 or something like that, but it was down for repairs, so they had sort of presented a list like, you want to fire one of these? And I had realized I had never fired an MG34 before. I had done the 42, which in my case had been a little bit of a jam factory because I just tried to burst it a little bit. Apparently these older World War II machine guns really don't like it when you try to just squeeze off 3 to 5 shots. They have it, especially when they're as beat up as the ones I was firing. They tend to choke on that a little bit. You are very much encouraged to just grab it, pull the trigger down, and fire till you got nothing else. So I did that on the MG34, and it was, of course, fantastic. If you ever get the opportunity to fire a machine gun from this era, they are, how to put it, they are a real gun from a perceptual standpoint at its most video game-esque. The combination of the sparks and the volume of metal moving around and the sound and the vibration are just, I think they're the real firearms that live up most to the sort of fantasy of how intense a gun could feel when firing that may have been built in your head from years and years of playing games and watching movies and such. They are all fun. And though my shoulder, definitely my soft, pliant programmer shoulder, ended up regretting it, I realized I had never fired an M4 shotgun. So I just figured I would get that as an experience, and it was as bruise-tacular as I expected it to be. A fun time, but I don't think I'm gonna get one anytime soon. But it was one of those things that I just wanted to sort of just once again sort of confirm some assumptions that I had about sort of bolt feel, weight, recoil, etc. So it was useful, but ow. And then the last thing I went to fire was the Beretta Modello M37, which is an old Italian machine gun that fires from this just very, very strange feeding mechanism. It's sort of just this plate that all the rounds are lined up on, and it fires, and then it places the casing back in that round, or it might not even extract it. I would have to look at the mechanism, but always a good fun. And actually, it was the first thing I think I've had to fire there while sitting on my butt.
Wow. Push arm and spit. Fantastic.
Yeah. Which was also quite enjoyable. So I do want to put a more like person portable version of this in the game at some point, just because the loading mechanism is just too unique and too strange and super fun. But yeah, that was my little Battlefield trip. I don't know, it's been interesting for me over the years of working on this game to sort of go back in and fire more guns basically over the course of what has not just been the game's development and my own changing ideas of what is important when it comes to simulating a firearm and what I am looking for, as well as the growth of of collecting and shooting as an actual hobby for myself. Like when I started this out, I had a very small fraction of the actual time on real steel that I do now. And so it's been fascinating as I've built that physical literacy and the digital literacy in making the game, how my perception of various platforms has changed, how a fully automatic gun definitely feels different, years into getting used to doing that than it does the first time, which is pretty overwhelming. So yeah, but this is obviously a ritual I will continue to do for at least as long as I'm still working on this game. There are still a whole bunch of things on the list that I want to get in there and try. So yeah. Well, I hope this has been interesting to hear me ramble about the various things I'm into. Obviously, there's a couple definitely coming at some point. I know I had said a while back that I'm like done with the MP5 series and such in H3, but I would like to actually get the 33 rifle in there just because it's handsome. As I said, the Ultimax will be coming at some point. The MG34 probably, and the Modella. So if you want to know what Anton's current wish list of things to get into the game at some point in the year, there's a couple of them for you. So, but especially now that I got to fire them in real life, that always gets me into the desire of like, I will now want to replicate it and see how close I can get certain aspects of operation and feel to converge with reality. So these trips always end up being inspirational in that way. Anywho, that's about it for this week. I should have another alpha for you folks next week with more bug fixes and tweaks and progress with some of the other stuff that I am working on. I probably am going to have a new destructible target prototype in the next alpha, assuming certain sound work is done, which I'm going to allow you to actually spawn, because what I want to start doing with all of the like destructible object stuff that I'm working on starting next week is some benchmarking. So those of you who love creating giant piles of things, many hundred objects high, and then stuffing explosives into them and seeing what happens, I am going to need your help next week. So yeah. Anywho, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you soon. Peace.